welcome to Combat Thoughts. I'm Robbie.
I'm Lee.
And I'm Alex.
We're going to take a deeper look at the culture and philosophy behind martial arts. Basic question is, how are you feeling for it?
So pretty good. I just had my first training session of the day. I am going to my second one in a few hours. Yeah, man, lots of tough rounds. I just trained at Sarah's, Matt Sarah's gym. So I alternate days between Matt Sarah's gym and Renzo Gracie Northern Valley, which is owned by Professor Carl Mastero, and both like old school Renzo black belts. And yeah, I alternate days there. I'm training like 6 days out of the week. I take one day off. I take Mondays off, which I know is like a weird day to take off, but it's like, that's the day without no-gi classes. So that's the day I take off. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the weekends are good, but you set your own schedule. There's no need for you to stick to what everyone else does.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is that 6 days a week on, one off? Is that normal, or is this special for a camp, for an event?
No, I mean, I don't really do like camps per se, because I'm always training, right? Like I enjoy training. If I'm not training, I kind of get like depressed. I guess it's like what I love to do. So no, I don't. I mean, when I say like I don't do camps, like I will do specific training leading up to an event, but I don't really modify my schedule or anything like that, you know?
What does the specific training look like then? Because obviously you've got a specific opponent. Is it to do with that, or?
Yeah. So, I mean, you have to keep in mind, I always think you got to do two things. You've got to be training for, and like, let's say you have a meaningful event that's coming up. You should be doing specific things for that event. But at the same time, if that's all you're doing, you're never going to develop, right? This is a trap that I think a lot of competitors fall into, where they put all of their energy into their short-term goals, right? So for instance, let's say you were doing an EBI rules tournament, right? There's certain things that, to be frank, are not really worth your time focusing on if that's what you're trying to win, right? If you're trying to win an EBI rules tournament, to be frank, the main thing you should be doing is back escapes, armbar escapes, and holding on to the back, right? You work on those three things, you can win EBI rules tournaments. But at the same time, and those things are good to work on, make no mistake. But at the same time, you also ought to be thinking about your long-term development, broadly speaking. So for instance, like for my upcoming opponent, right, I have specific things I'm working on, but I also have like generally things that I'm doing, like, you know, like right now I have like 6 months where I have two main things I'm working on. I don't want to say what they are, but
okay,
set
sure.
people off. But like, yeah, I have two main things I'm working on. And those are things that I think are going to help me out for this opponent, for ADCC trials, and then also for I have another match coming up after ADCC trials, which hasn't been announced yet. And then for this specific opponent, I have other things I'm working on, smaller things I'm already good at, but I think that, quite frankly, that I need to be super sharp at against Camille. So yeah.
Yeah, no problem. What, like, so someone's a back attacker, back escapes, someone's a leg locker, leg lock escapes, and someone's weak against guillotines, that kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure, yes.
And just out of interest, so you say you work on two things for 6 months. I know you said you didn't want to say what they are, but do you mean like positions, or broadly speaking?
Much broader than that. I mean, you can do something like, you could take, I mean, there's a lot of utility in that, and sometimes I will do that. You could take a single position and spend a lot of time on it. But right now, I'm thinking more broadly. I have right in front of me, I have my notebook. It's a binder. I find having a binder with paper in it is a lot better than having a notebook, because if you have a notebook, let's say you're writing notes on a topic, and then you don't have any space left because you have the next topic like two pages over, well, you're fucked. Whereas with a notebook, you can just put new pages, and I keep like little tabs for each topic. I prefer writing notes physically than typing them, because just from my own personal experience, when I write notes on a computer, I will do that, but the downside to that is that I'm always in the back of my mind, like thinking, like, yeah, what's on YouTube right now? So I don't want that temptation. So I like to I'll watch the instructional and I'll write. So then there's less temptation to do other stupid bullshit.
It's like a focus
Sorry,
thing.
Yeah, it's a focus for me. It's a focus thing. Yeah, yeah. It's just like and I don't know. Maybe there's something like I feel like when I physically write it, I don't know. Like I recall the information better. But I also type a lot because there are big advantages to the typing notes as well. But yeah. So yeah, I mean the two things I'm working on now are to be frank, they're fairly broad. You know what I mean? But they are things that I think are very important for my game right now and for the events that I have coming up. And make no mistake, like I'm going to work on everything else. You know what I mean? Like, so for instance, this is like I'm not specifically focused on like, you know, front headlock right now, but if in the training room, like I still want to be sharp with that, right? Like I'm going to go for it, right? If the opportunity is there to take a front headlock and work from there, of course I'm going to do it. You know what I mean? So I'm always like skills are not static. Like you don't gain a skill and then, oh, you have it for life, right? Like they degrade, and some of them will degrade very slowly, right? Like I haven't ridden a bike in years, but I'm pretty confident I could still ride a bike if I got on one. But like, you know, things like, you know, leg lock offense or, you know, guillotine mechanics or guard passing, like these are skills that will degrade much more rapidly than riding a bike. So if you aren't constantly staying sharp with them, you're gonna fall back, you know, in terms of your skills. So this is one of the hardest things about getting better at jiu-jitsu is that you have a certain amount of time, right? You know, a set amount of time, and you need to constantly be learning new things, but you need to also not lose what you've already got. And I think the trick to doing that is identifying, you in a sense, it's kind of like playing the stock market. You've got to say, okay, what do I think is going to pay off 6 months or 2 years from now, right? So for instance, you can get psychotically good at anything, right? You could spend, if you took a guy and you said, okay, I'm going to spend like 10 years working on Americanas, bro, that guy's going to have fucking good Americanas. Let me ask you a question. Do you think that time would have been better spent working on guard passing? In my opinion, probably yes, depending on what his goals are, right? If you're just training because you enjoy it and you just happen to just want to be an Americana, you know, expert, by all means, bro, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you have specific goals, like let's say you want to win a certain tournament, which has, you know, there's a certain meta, you know, man, it's,
like
you
EBI.
gotta like EBI, right? Exactly. So if your goal is to win EBI and then you spend all your training time on guard passing, geez, that's maybe not the best use of your time. You know what I mean? But that same thing for IBJJF, that's probably a very good use of your time. You know what I mean? So it depends what your goals are, right? And I think your goals should just be to be a good grappler, generally speaking. So you've got to like, when I look at skill sets, I try to narrow down what is the highest percentage set of things in this skill area that will yield the best long-term results. So like, I mean, the trick is that I don't believe a lot of instructors will tell you, oh, this is the best thing. You have to do this. I don't think that exists as often as people talk. I think oftentimes I prefer to talk in terms of advantages and disadvantages. Like I'll give you a specific example that I think people debate about all the time, and I think it's a debate that it will never end. When it comes to the topic of guard retention, should you focus on inside or outside position? I'm sure you've heard this debate. Like this is a pretty consistent debate, right?
Yeah.
And the trick is like, all right, so I'll give you one of the main arguments. People that play outside position, they'll say, well, it's easier to keep your frames. Definitely true, right? Longer range frames, right? People that play inside position, they say, but you're less likely to be counter leg locks, right? These are both completely valid arguments because they're both correct, right? So the trick is then which is better? Well, unfortunately, neither one is inherently better. It totally depends. It depends on the opponent you're going against, your style, and the rule set, right? And you're going to have to make a calculated decision as an athlete. Which do I want to spend? I think that's a topic where I think you should be good at both of them, to be honest. But like, you got to ask yourself, which do I want to spend more time on, right? So for instance, in my training this morning, I was making a frame that I know there's a counter to, but barely anyone does the counter. The trick is like, do I throw that out? And I used to always say, yes, you should never do it if there's a good counter. But the trouble is like, then you throw out like 98% of jiu-jitsu.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So it's a hard thing to, you're always trying to kind of guess like, okay, what will yield what will yield the longest term results at the highest percentage? Like, what do I think is going to pay off? And you might be wrong. You know what I mean? There's no way to definitively be right. Let's say that there's a set of strategies you can use, which against 99% of people will pay off really, really well. But there's 1% of guys that will counter it really hard. And then there's a second strategy where it's more like it will work 50% of the time, but 50% of guys, you won't get countered, but like they'll stop it. They'll hold it off, right? So difference between a counter and like a defense, right? I'd go for the one that's 99% successful, and then you're going to get countered that 1% of the time. You know what I mean? Because that's going to yield, you're going to win more often, you know? But someone more conservative might say, and I still would say I'm a more conservative grappler, but someone even more conservative than me might say, no, never go for the thing that'll get you countered. And I think there's validity to that, and I don't want to say that that's wrong. It's just perspective, you know? So, yeah.
It strikes me that specific comparison maybe is almost applicable to open tournament versus show jiu-jitsu, in the way that a show jiu-jitsu, at the end of the day, you are kind of expected to take more risks for more flashy or more spectacular finishes, whereas open tournament jiu-jitsu, it's about, you know, at the end of the day, winning by an advantage is still winning.
Yeah, sure.
It's kind of a rig.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. Man, it's funny because like I kind of almost feel like the opposite, because like if I'm in like I was talking to one of my training partners about this morning. Tournaments, in my opinion, should exist primarily for the purpose of skill development and like growth as a grappler. If you go out to tournaments and you're just gaming them, I kind of think like, man, you're doing this for the wrong reason. And I don't know, man, I don't really respect that approach. Whereas a super fights to me mainly exist so that we can like, it's more about like ego, I think, you know, like ego and like building your brand, so to speak. Right. So with super fights, if somebody doesn't take risks in tournaments and they're just like gaming the system, to me, that's more like, this is really kind of corny. But like in super fights, if someone does it, I sort of get it more, because like there's more eyes on you. And so you don't want to look stupid, right? It still sucks either way. I mean, the trick is like, at the end of the day, it's like, if you like, man, there's different ways you can look at this, right? So there's like winning at all costs, or there's winning, and this is going to sound kind of esoteric, but there's winning and then maintaining like your integrity as a grappler, where it's like you like, okay, so I don't want to say whose name this is, but there was a former ADCC champion who won ADCC, didn't score a single point, didn't submit anyone, and he won because everyone just pulled guard against him and got hit with a negative, but he still won the gold. The trick is like, is he an ADCC champion? 100% he is. But at the same time, it's like, I'm not sure if that is worth it to me. You know, I want to go out there and pursue the art of control leading to the application of submission. And it's not even about getting the submission. You don't have to get the submission. There have been so many amazing matches. One of my favorite matches ever is Cobrinha versus Gianni Grippo, ADCC 2015. There's no submission, you know, but it's a fucking awesome match where both guys are going after each other. There's constant engagement. So I don't care so much about the submission. I just care about our guys engaging. And because engagement to me is about, it is you're grappling with integrity, so to speak. Whereas like you're not just trying to like game the system. You're trying to actually do jiu-jitsu. Like if you go to the academy and you roll with somebody and in your head you're like tabulating advantages and stuff, like that's like, you know, it's like, that's not why we train. We train to develop the art of jiu-jitsu, which is ultimately ultimately about control leading to the application of submission. So like and I don't think there's a rule set which forces that. I think that it's always about the attitudes of the athletes. So I'm kind of ranting here, but like,
it's all good. It's good material.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's probably better. It's probably easier for you with a more exciting style. For someone with a slightly more dull style who maybe doesn't get to super fights. Yeah, I guess it's about your goals. I don't mean so much gaming the system. I mean more if I can potentially get a flashy technique, but it might get me finished, I'll probably more likely to do that when there's a lot of eyes on me, rather than if I'm trying to win a medal and I've just got to pass a guy, I'll probably just pass him to get the medal. But perhaps that's the difference between me and you, and that's why you're in your position and I'm in mine.
Well, I think the trick is like, so, okay, now I understand the question better. I feel like sometimes I don't understand what people find exciting in jiu-jitsu, because what I find exciting, sometimes I was watching Nicky Ryan versus Paulo Miao the other day, and I was like, fuck, this is such a good match from ADCC. And then I went into the comments and everyone is roasting Paulo for like stalling. What are you talking about? How is he stalling? It's like they sometimes I think people, they like misdiagnose the problem, which is like Paulo was not stalling. Was Paulo looking for the submission? No, not really. But Paulo was attacking Nicky. At the ADCC level, dude, it's super rare that submissions happen. They happen, but they're very rare. That's why when they happen, they're such a big fucking deal. When Craig, strangled Leandro Lowe, that's why everyone fucking went crazy, because it's such a ludicrous ending to the match. When Lachlan heel hooks all those guys in the absolute, that's just like the least plausible way that could have gone down. That's why it's so amazing, right? But to me is like, man, I watch matches and I'm like, that was an amazing match. And I go into the comments, people are like shitting on it. Like people were shitting on Paulo. They're saying, oh, Paulo just games the system. What are you talking about? Paulo retained his guard beautifully. He swept Nicky and he maintained an extremely good base on top while looking to pass. Dude, no point was he stalling. So it's like, I don't know what those guys were watching. To me, that was an amazing match. But like, I don't know, maybe they wanted Paulo to do a jumping triangle or something like that. Fair enough.
Perhaps, yeah. We've gone way off piste from Polaris. Great material all the same, but to bring it back a little bit, I'm wondering about, maybe not just Polaris, but obviously you're quite a seasoned competitor. You've been in a lot. How do you, more emotionally speaking, approach competition? Do you still get very nervous for them, or at this point, is it just by the by?
Man, it's a tough thing where like I definitely still get nervous. And I think that you have to understand that it's a combination of like, when you get nervous as an athlete, it's a combination of like just simple, like your emotions, but it's also like your biology. You know what I mean? Like your body is like, you've been evolved as an animal to recognize danger, right? And if you don't think some guy going out there trying to break your limbs and choke you unconscious is not a danger, I don't know. That's kind of crazy to me. Like, so there's always going to be that simple factor of, well, man, this is a dangerous situation. So there's always going to be nerves. But I've definitely gotten better over time at like dealing with the nerves, but it's a constant thing, man. I don't think you ever, at least for me, I don't want to speak for everybody, but like, I don't think I'll ever fully stop being nervous. And the more I compete, so when I have big events coming up, I try to do a lot of smaller events, because those help me build up just like a groove of competing, right? Whereas like there was one span of time about a year ago where I had 9 tournaments in 8 weeks, and I felt super fucking good. Like not physically, but mentally, near the end of the 9 weeks. It was before the ADCC trials, and then the ADCC trials got canceled and they were pushed back a year, and now they're coming up in like a month or so. Right. So so I felt really ready to go for those trials, but unfortunately they got canceled. And so like, that's a situation that I was trying to build up towards, right? Whereas like, my nerves lessen over time, but for me, I don't think it ever goes away. And I'm kind of skeptical as to the idea that it ever goes away for anyone. Cause like I've talked to friends of mine that are like, oh, the only way it could completely go away, I'll say, is if you just maybe stop caring at all. Right. Like I've seen this, like guys who I have friends, teammates who just, they've been competing for a while and then they come to a point where they just stop giving a shit. And it's not that there's anything wrong with it, but it's like, damn, man, it's like, that's when I think you're going to stagnate, right? You've got to, like, do I care about what happens in competition? Yes, I do. You know what I mean? And if you don't, I think you're going to stagnate. So you have to care, because if you don't care, why are you doing it? You know what I mean? Why would you keep going out there? Right. So of course you're going to need to care, but you can't care so much that if you lose, you know, you can't care so mumuch that, like, I have other friends that care so much that they stopped competing. And it's a sad thing because they're very good grapplers, right? And it stops being like something they even want to do. So there's always a balance there between those two things. And for me, like, you know, I think the main thing that keeps me going competitively is like that overall, I like it more than I hate it. I still hate it, but I like it more than I hate it. So yeah.
When you say you like it, do you mean you like it in there or you like it afterwards? Because that's what I've noticed. I hate it every time, and afterwards I'm like, that was fucking sick.
Yeah, man, it's both, dude. I've had moments in matches where I'm like, fuck, this is such a good match. Like I was enjoying the match in the match, even though it was absolutely miserable at the same time. You know, like so like, yeah, man. I mean, like, I love jiu-jitsu, and when there's like a beautiful expression of technique, like that gets me like, man, I'm like, fuck, I love this shit so much, right? So like I had a match not too long ago where I lost by a penalty for pulling guard, but like, man, the match was so fucking good, right? It was at neck and neck, me against another like very seasoned black belt, and I lost, but it didn't feel like a match where I was like, dude, I wasn't happy, maybe a mistake, but I wasn't like, fuck, like I got obliterated, right? It was a super competitive match. There was no points scored. It was just the negative, and then we went after each other, right? And like, I remember in the middle of the match thinking like, fuck, this is a good match. Like, this is an awesome match. Like, I am learning stuff about jiu-jitsu from this match. And that's what I really like. But yeah, and there's also the part where it's like, nobody wants to lose. Like, that fucking sucks. So you could pretend that you're as like a lot of people talk about like, dude, I'm just there to get better and grow. And I do think that's the attitude we should have, right? But make the mistake, you also want to win, dude. Come on, man. We always want to win. Yeah.
Yes, well, that is why you're in a competition, I guess.
Yeah.
I've always I've kind of wondered about that recently, if people kind of talk about ways to like get rid of nerves, but there are two things that strike me. Is one, athletes like I mean, George St. Pierre is a very famous one from MMA, who got horribly anxious before every fight he had. Like panic attacks in the locker room and stuff like that, I hear. It strikes me that people talk about nerves being this thing you want to get rid of, but actually it doesn't seem to me that the really nervous people compete badly. I kind of wonder if eliminating all the nerves would just make people compete kind of in a kind of a stagnant way, if you were able to get rid of all that.
Well, it's a tricky thing. So one of the best conversations I ever had with, I guess, who's my former coach, John Danaher, was on this very topic, and I'll never forget what he told me. It was one of the most insightful things he ever said to me, which is that you cannot, in his opinion, and I agree with him, you cannot fundamentally change how you react to like the nerves of competition. If you get really nervous, that's not going to go away. Right. You can, of course, like you like we were talking about earlier, you can get better at sort of dealing with the nerves. Right. But you're never going to totally eliminate it. Right. It's just going to be a part of your experience as a competitor. Right. Some people are going to have less. Some people are going to have more. Right. But what he said to me was that great champions have been all over the spectrum. You know, he specifically brought up GSP. He said to me, I've never seen an athlete with worse nerves than GSP. But look at what he did. You know what I mean? Like, it's unbelievable. He's in my opinion, he's probably the greatest MMA fighter of all time. He's definitely in the debate, right? So like, clearly you can get the job done with the nerves. I always tell athletes that I coach, I'm not like currently coaching anywhere, but I used to be a coach at a local school here in New York, where I would always tell my students, like, they would ask me all the time, how do I get rid of my nerves? And I would give a version of what Danaher had told me, which is like, don't even try. It's a waste of your time to try to get rid of your nerves. You should focus on what you can control. What you can control is your preparation and your performance. That's not the results. You don't control the results, but you can control your preparation. Sometimes things can get in the way of that, but you have more control over that. Yeah, you have more control over that than anything else, and your performance, right? These two things you can have control over, right? More so than anything else, right? So like, you focus on that, and that's all you can do, right? I give the analogy often of imagine you worked for the police force and your job was to defuse bombs, right? The only thing you would care about, obviously you're going to be very nervous. This is a very anxious situation. The only thing you're going to care about is, what are the technical procedures I need to enact in order to defuse this bomb? You're not going to be thinking to yourself, oh man, how do I emotionally whip myself up into a state of not having nerves? No, you're going to be focused on, what do I need to do physically, technically to get this job done. And I think that jiu-jitsu, we need to look at it like that. And I think the reason we don't is because jiu-jitsu, just like other sports, like, we have a culture of turning sports competition into like an emotional thing, turning it into like, just the other day I watched the classic American movie, Remember the Titans, which is about like American football, in high school, right? Okay. And it's always this like, it's fun to watch, where it's like, there's this like, it's all about like the emotion and the spectacle and the story, right? And it's natural to find that stuff fun and appealing, but let's not confuse ourselves. The reason that high school football team won those games wasn't because of like the inspirational story. They won those games because of the technical procedures that they enacted, right? And like, so that's the main thing as an athlete you need to concern yourself with, right? All the other stuff, right? Like, so like, all the other things, like, about like, are you getting nervous? All these other things, I just don't believe you can control it. And if you can't control it, don't worry about it. You know what I mean? You can't, there's nothing you can do about it. You kind of have to let it go, And ever since I started thinking about that, I've done way better. It's helped me a lot because I've had the battle with those nerves, right? And it's almost, in a sense, letting go of that battle has helped my nerves lessen. So yeah, I always try to impart this on students as well.
I think that sounds very Zen, sort of a release of control, and it kind of all works out, sort of thing. So I think it's very close to actually what Zen is about. One interesting thing you said, you said you don't do camps, but you've also said that you do that in the run up to a big competition. You do lots of smaller competitions. That's interesting for a start, because that's kind of a camp in its own right. But I wonder then, when ADCC trials got cancelled after the last time, did you feel like you'd invested a huge amount of time into those events beforehand? Did you feel like that was an investment into ADCC trials? How did it make you feel when that got pushed?
Well, so I actually happened to get injured at the end of because I think I was competing too much, to be frank.
Oh, right.
And so, yeah, so I wound up having to take like a month off anyway, so it didn't really matter. But I don't feel like I wasted time doing those tournaments. I felt like I got a lot better as a grappler. Ultimately, the goal is always just to get better as a grappler, right? Like, that's the only reason I'm doing this, is because I like getting better as a grappler. If there's any other reason you're doing this, I kind of think you're an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, to be completely honest, like, if you're doing this for money or fame, it's like, bro, there are a lot of other things you can be doing where you can make a lot more money and be much more famous. Jiu-jitsu is a niche, tiny little sport. Nobody really cares about it. You know what I mean? Like, I think your time is better suited doing other things. But if you happen to love jiu-jitsu, then by all means, do what I'm doing and invest all that time into it. Because for me, you got to think, like, what is the ultimate goal? I think a lot of athletes, they get this idea in their head that once they achieve, let's say that I won ADCC, let's say some ludicrous shit happened and I won absolute. So I'm like the greatest 66 kg grappler in history, right? Is that going to fundamentally change my life in any other way except for like obviously on a professional level? Like, of course, more people are going to want to come to my seminars and things like that. No, I'm going to be the same person. I'm going to be the same person tomorrow that I was today. So you got to ask yourself, okay, if you're not like that, after I win a tournament, my life isn't going to magically become happy, right? So then if I'm doing this, it should be because it's making me happy in the first place, right? So that's what I try to focus on. And for me, like competition is, I try to situate that within that wider goal of ultimately I'm doing jiu-jitsu because it makes me happy. It makes my life better, right? So I try to situate competition within that. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes competition, I feel like, gets in the way of that almost. I have a friend who's a very, very good black belt who's never competed ever. I was talking to him about why, and he's like, it just doesn't appeal to me. Like he doesn't like the shit talk. He doesn't like, he gets too anxious, and I totally respect that, man. I get it, like, but I do think that I think there's a way you can have that mindset of like a healthy relationship with jiu-jitsu, and like where you focus, like the reason you're doing it is just because you love jiu-jitsu. There shouldn't be any other reason that you're doing it. You can have that, but you can also have the competitions where it helps you to get better. Because for me, like competition, like what it does is ultimately it's giving you a goal, right? It's giving you a goal. Some of the periods of time where I got the most improvement in jiu-jitsu or when I was working towards a tournament and I was working on specific skills, or when I was coaching people. So for instance, when I was living in Singapore, I had a bunch of students that wanted to do the ADCC trials, which are supposed to happen in Singapore in December. I have a feeling they won't happen, but we'll see. But like I had a bunch of students that were getting ready for that. And that was 8 months. It was like 8-9 months away from where we were. But I was spending a lot of time studying what I thought they needed to develop to do well at that tournament. And that having that goal, man, I feel like my knowledge on certain topics skyrocketed, like because I had a specific goal. And so it wasn't even for me, but I really enjoyed doing this research for them. And it gave me focus, you know what I mean? So that's really what I love about competition. And I think that it's possible to not have to have competition to do that. Like you can be just a guy who doesn't do competitions, but have that focus. But I think competition is a good way to like, it puts some wind in your sails, so to speak.
Well, so something I've been thinking about recently is, all right, so people often say, okay, yeah, it's fine to be in the gym, it's fine to like get tapped, it's fine to try stuff that's not your A game, that sort of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all completely valid. And it got me thinking, like, if it's okay to just go out there and do potentially stupid shit, like just trying different techniques and stuff that you wouldn't otherwise do, it strikes me that competition kind of gives you a point where it's like, surely there has to be a point where just doing experimental stuff is kind of a bit, it just becomes pointless, it just becomes experimentation for the sake of experimentation. It strikes me that competition gives you something that you're experimenting for. And if I was coaching, which I'm not, I feel like maybe that could be the other thing that I'm doing it for. I'm experimenting and then I'm passing on that knowledge elsewhere. But without either coaching or competition, I always wonder, like, at what point things have to be serious.
Yeah, I used to have this exact mindset. A couple years ago, I had this exact mindset. But I think the problem with it is that you run up against this tension between doing jiu-jitsu and winning tournaments. Because you can absolutely win tournaments and quite frankly not do what I would consider like jiu-jitsu. Like you can just, I don't want to name names, but like there are guys who make whole careers out of doing what I would call anti-jiu-jitsu. And it's just awful. And it's like, to me, yeah, it goes against like I said, the integrity of jiu-jitsu, where it's like, bro, I don't care necessarily if you're getting submissions, but I care, are you engaging? Are you like, we all know when someone's pretending to engage and when someone's actually engaging, you know what I mean? Like we've all seen this, right? Someone's up on an advantage or 2 points or whatever, and they just decide, okay, it's time to pretend to be doing stuff and wait for the end of the match, right? And like, I say this often, I don't blame a competitor for doing what they feel like they have to do to win a competition, right? But I do think, but I'm also not going to pretend like I respect that. You know what I mean? To me, it's like, you know what I mean? Like if somebody goes out there and man, they just systematically just destroy me, that I respect. You're doing jiu-jitsu. But if you go out there and you game the system, all right, man, you did it. But it's like, that's not, to me, that's not like what we should be doing. It's sort of like a moral claim, if you will, right? I'm making a prescriptive claim here where I don't think that that's what we should be doing, right? You can do whatever you want, man, in terms of like, this is your life, these are your choices. But at the end of the day, is just gaming the system, is using competition as a metric for your, for everything. Is that going to lead to a satisfying grappling and jiu-jitsu experience? I don't know. For me, it absolutely doesn't. And I think ultimately what leads us to satisfaction in jiu-jitsu and grappling is skill development over time, right? And the expression of that. And I've won many matches where I just was fucking not happy with it, where I won, but I just felt like absolute shit because I didn't feel like I expressed skill well. I didn't feel like I grew in any meaningful way. It just was like a fucking bland, shitty match. I have one match in particular that I bring this match up all the time. I won it, but I'm literally ashamed of the match. It's like, because I was out there and I took the most cowardly strategy to winning and it worked. But after I felt like gross. I was like, it's so lame, but like, so I think it's tough to bring it back. I think it's tough to use competition as the metric. The metric has to be something more abstract. The metric has to be, at least in my opinion, has to be jiu-jitsu itself, which I would define as the art of control leading to the application of submission. Like I really like that definition because that implicit in that is engagement. You know what I mean? And athletes will choose not to engage in competition because they're worried about getting countered. And that's totally valid. It's totally fair. But that's what I am shooting after. I'm not necessarily shooting after. I could hypothetically see two futures for myself. One where, like, let's say I win ADCC, but I do it in a way that, like, I just think that it's like not me living, or rather grappling in accordance with like my principles, so to speak, right? And then a second scenario where I don't medal. Maybe I don't even, maybe I don't even win a match, right? But I still feel like I grappled in accordance with how I think we should be pursuing jiu-jitsu, right? So yeah, and I would feel much more satisfied doing the second one, right? So I'd rather, like, there's a great maxim by Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, where the English translation is accordance with the way overcomes winning. So accordance with the way, this is very esoteric, obviously, but like doing jiu-jitsu in accordance with like a higher principle, something like the way, is more valuable than just winning. Now you can grapple in accordance with the way and win, but you can also not grapple in accordance with the way and win. And to me, I'd rather prioritize first and foremost grappling in a way that's, I want to focus on the art of control leading to the application of submission. And possibly that will lead to me getting countered more, me losing more, if the ultimate goal is to win competitions, to be fucking perfectly honest, the only thing I think you need to work on is wrestling, submission defense, and your base on top. You don't even need to be good at passing. You just got to have base, not get swept. You get really good at those three things, bro. You're solid. You could do serious damage at ADCC. You know what I mean? But man, is that why I'm doing this? Because I want to just practice. Those are valuable skills. I'm not knocking those skills. I'm just saying, is that the only reason I'm doing this? Because I want to get good at that? Or is it that I want to learn, and I want to see how far jiu-jitsu on the whole can be taken. But anyway, so I'm ranting again, but hopefully you guys get my point.
No, that's all good. I mean, I see what you're saying about. I keep hearing jiu-jitsu recently. I was listening to do you know BJJ Mental Models? Excellent,
Yes.
excellent
Yes.
podcast.
Great
And
podcast.
I've completely forgotten the main host's name, but he described jiu-jitsu as a vehicle for personal growth.
Yeah.
Not quite the application of, not quite the practice of control leading to the application of submission, but it does also sort of flag up the idea that there kind of has to be more of a point than just rolling around on the ground.
Yeah. So I've been on that podcast a few times. I love those guys. It's
of
two
course
brothers.
You have. I've listened to you on there.
Yeah. It's Steve and Matt Kwan. Yeah, they're great guys. I'm actually going on again. I'm going to debate Rob Bernacki on the Star Wars prequels. So that's the only thing we're talking about on the podcast. No jiu-jitsu, just the Star Wars prequels.
All right.
Like, yeah. So like, but like anyway. So like, yeah, man. Like that is like, so you can like that basic same idea that they said on the podcast. Completely agree with them. Like that's how I want to live. And like, make no mistake, man, this is like fucking, it's not like I'm not trying to sit here and grandstand and act like I'm not like a salty bastard when I lose. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? Like I am, you know what I mean? Like I have my principles, and then obviously I'm a human being and I'm fallible, and like, I don't live up to them always. But the hope is that I can, you know, as a human being, I can work through my weaknesses as a person and ultimately strive for that higher ideal, right? That's what I'm shooting for. And like, yeah, so like, yeah, I completely agree with Steve and Matt, whichever one of them said it.
I don't remember exactly, but you know what, I was going to ask you about what your goals were for the rest of the year and for jiu-jitsu, but I think we've kind of touched on that in a much more meaningful way than saying winning ADCC or anything like that. We've also completely gone off the idea of having a really short podcast because this has been fantastic overall.
Okay, sure, no worries.
But I mean, I guess I guess I just want to ask a couple more questions about like Polaris in general. I mean, what is this for? What is Polaris for you? Is this a run up for ADCC, or is this something more meaningful for showing your skills and your development?
Yeah, man, I definitely wouldn't view it as like a run up for ADCC trials. Polaris is, in my opinion, the biggest super fight event. To me, it's the pinnacle of the super fight world. You know, years ago, I wanted to be on Polaris. Years ago, I sat down and I thought to myself, okay, what is the like premier super fight show in the world, right? And what I did was I went on all the different super fight shows and I checked which had the most Instagram followers. That's kind of how I determined like what the top one was. And Polaris won by like a landslide. And like, yeah, it had the most. It might not still. I have no idea. I haven't checked, but in my, I haven't checked recently. But in my mind, still Polaris is the pinnacle. You know what I mean? It's the top of the super fight world. There's a level of professionalism and, you know, like the quality of like the aesthetics of the event, I think, are higher than any other event. And not even just to, there's so many other things too. Like the commentary, I think, tends to be higher quality. Even when dumb things are said in the commentary, it's always dumb and funny. Like it's always like really like memorable. Like one of my favorites is, and I'm not knocking these guys, the specific guy, but it's funny, so I want to mention it. Nick Osipchak in one match, he's like, that's illegal. And then right after, Josh Palmer's like, no, that's perfectly legal in the Polaris rules. And I just like, I've always remembered that. I thought it was so funny. And like, so there's just so many great moments in Polaris. So like, yeah, it's very meaningful to me. And my goal is I want to do a lot of them. Like I don't want to just do like one Polaris match and never come back. Like my goal is I want to go out there. I want to have a very, very good showing. And I think Camille is the perfect opponent for that. Camille is not like a stalling, boring grappler. He's very submission oriented. So I would be shocked if it was not a good match. So I think we're both going to go out there and go after each other. And I'm hoping to come back many times because I love the event. And yeah, so to me, it's I wouldn't say it's as meaningful as trials. I don't think anything surpasses trials and the ADCC. Like pretty much nothing compares to that. But as far as the super fight world goes, it's the top. So yeah, to me, it's super meaningful.
Excellent. And then in terms of like traveling abroad and things like that, is this pose an extra challenge for you, or do you just not really care so much about that?
No, I don't really care. I mean, I travel a lot. You know, I just got back from Europe. You know, so I'm going back. It's after Polaris. I'll be back in Europe again for a tournament in Italy, and then I have another super fight in Europe. And so I won't. I'm pretty used to it at this point. I've competed like 6 times outside of the U.S. I've competed in Asia. I've competed in Europe. You know, it doesn't make a big deal to me. What makes a bigger deal is if you don't prepare properly for that, right? So I'm flying in a little bit earlier than I think most of the other athletes because I want to like not. I'm coming from the U.S., right? Like I don't want to have jet lag, right? Camille is coming from Poland, which is much closer. So I want to come in and I'm going to train with my friends in London, and I am going to just do my best to not be super jet lagged. But I think I'll be fine. I have so much experience flying at this point. I took a direct flight to Singapore that's 27 fucking hours more than one time. So that'll prepare you for anything in terms of flying. Yeah. So I think that I'll be fine.
Nice one. Perfect. Well, look, mate, I say we close it off there. It's been fantastic overall. Sure. And as I said earlier, I'd love to get you on another podcast at some point. So look, thanks for coming on.